Supposedly that's everything.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it just seems like something's missing, doesn't it?
To understand the full depth of this theory, we must return to the very beginning, long before the van in the desert and the blue meth. We must go back to gray matter technologies. The official story we hear is full of contradictions. Look, in the later seasons, Walt's former partners, Elliot and Gretchen Schwartz, go on air and declare that Walt's only contribution to their multi-billion-dollar company was the name.
Honey?
The company name.
The company name. We came up with it by combining our names. Schwartz means black, black plus white makes gray.
I believe this is an obvious lie, an attempt to save their brand's reputation by disassociating themselves from America's most wanted drug lord. On the other hand, Walt himself believed until his dying day that he was cheated, that his life's work was stolen from him. This is also a lie, but a lie he told himself to justify his wounded pride. The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in the middle, and it is much more complex. Walter White was not just a co-founder. He was the genius who laid the scientific foundation for gray matter, but he left on his own. He sold his share for a mere $5,000. Why? Because of pride, because of his ego. As we learn from hints and omissions, he felt humiliated and inadequate next to the wealthy family of Gretchen, the woman he loved. He couldn't bear that feeling and ran away, creating a story of betrayal for himself, because admitting the truth, that he himself had given up his future due to an inferiority complex, was unbearable for him. As Mike Ehrmantraut would one day tell him, summing up his entire life.
But no, you just had to blow it up. You and your pride and your ego.
Now, pay attention to the key point. What exactly did gray matter do? It wasn't a software company. Their work involved advanced chemistry, X-ray crystallography, molecular switches, proton radiography. This is a high-risk field where researchers constantly work with volatile and potentially dangerous chemical compounds. In such an environment, the most modern and reliable ventilation and air filtration system is an absolute necessity. Any malfunction, any corner cutting on the quality of such equipment is not just negligence. It is a potential death sentence for the employees. And this is where I get to the main point. I believe that Walt's cancer was not created by his diagnosis. The cancer already lived within him. It was his years-long, festering resentment and wounded pride. It was his psychological tumor. The lung cancer diagnosis was merely the physical catalyst that allowed this internal disease to erupt and metastasize in the form of Heisenberg.
You're goddamn right.
Walt was not a good man who broke bad. He was a deeply resentful and embittered man who was just waiting for an excuse to unleash his inner monster, and I believe that this excuse was provided to him by a very specific force. Let's talk about Madrigal Electromotive GmbH. At first glance, it is a respectable German conglomerate, a giant with a diversified portfolio, industrial equipment, logistics, construction, and even the fast food chain Los Pollos Hermanos. But this diversification, I believe, is just a mask, a perfect cover for their true activities. We see that Madrigal is not just a company connected to crime. It is crime, cloaked in a corporate form. Their business model is the pinnacle of immoral capitalism, where human life has no value compared to profit.
I'm Mike Ehrmantraut, security consultant for Madrigal Electromotive.
With icy, impersonal calm, they talk about professionalism and information security, but every piece of advice is a veiled instruction for conducting criminal activity. Their philosophy is simple: follow orders, don't ask questions, be a cog in a huge machine working for the common good, that is, for the shareholders' profit. The perfect embodiment of this philosophy is Lydia Rodart Quayle.
Look at my shoes, aren't they great?
My God. You look like a gangster.
She is not a gangster. She is a nervous top manager obsessed with logistics and risk management. When she orders the killing of Mike's 11 men, it is not an act of cruelty, but a corporate decision. They need to cover their tracks, eliminate loose ends. When she panics because the meth purity has dropped to 74%, she is not worried about the quality of the product, but about supply disruptions and a drop in performance indicators. For her, people are just numbers in a report.
Nicely. This is what I do. You understand? I move things from point A to point B all over the globe. 1.2 million metric tons a month.
This is why I argue Madrigal is not a company with a few bad apples. Their entire system is built on the principle of maximum profit with minimum liability. Their structure, with numerous subsidiaries and complex logistics, is designed for plausible deniability, where the CEO in Hanover can always claim that some Peter Schuler was a lone wolf criminal. The evil of Madrigal is not a conspiracy, it is a systemic property. It is a self-replicating machine for which morality is an empty word. And for such a machine, selling substandard but cheaper equipment to a young research company like Gray Matter is not an extraordinary atrocity. I believe it is standard operating procedure, a logical, calculated business decision made within a system that does not account for human lives on its balance sheets. Now let's connect all the dots. I am building my argument on a logical chain that includes means, motive, and opportunity. As for the means, Gray Matter, as we've established, needed high-end industrial laboratory equipment, including complex ventilation systems and HEPA filters. And Madrigal, as we know, is a major manufacturer and supplier of precisely this type of equipment. The motive is obvious: profit. For Madrigal, supplying equipment for a promising startup would have been a lucrative contract, and to win the bid and increase their margin, they could have knowingly supplied a system that did not meet safety standards, skimping on materials or quality control. This is entirely consistent with their ruthless business ethic. Finally, the opportunity for such a deal is more than real. There is nothing surprising in the fact that an American scientific company could purchase equipment from one of the world leaders in this field. This connection is not explicitly stated in the series, but it is absolutely logical and plausible. If we accept this hypothesis, Walter White's diagnosis ceases to be a tragic accident. Walt is a non-smoker who develops late-stage lung cancer. My theory gives this a specific, terrifying reason: long-term exposure to carcinogenic substances in the Gray Matter laboratory due to a faulty ventilation system supplied by Madrigal. He becomes not just a victim of fate, but a victim of corporate negligence. His cancer is the physical manifestation of a decision made by some nameless manager in Hanover to save a few €1,000s on his health. Here arises a striking irony. Remember Walt's words from the first episode addressed to his students.
Chemistry is the study of matter, but I prefer to see it as the study of change.
Chemistry, the science of change, changed his life twice. First, his genius in this field gave him a chance at greatness. And then, I believe, the byproducts of this very same work poisoned him due to equipment failure. The very science that was the source of his pride became the cause of his death sentence. This makes his subsequent turn to cooking meth a perverted and dark application of his genius, a tragic attempt to regain power over the very element that betrayed him. And this is where the most terrifying part begins. Having become a victim of corporate cancer, Walter White does not simply die from it. He absorbs its logic and himself becomes a cancerous tumor, affecting everything around him.
A guy opens his door and gets shot, and you think that of me? No. I am the one who knocks.
Look at how he builds his empire. He doesn't just break bad, he becomes a businessman. And his business model is an exact replica of the Madrigal model, which he learned from their best agent, Gus Fring.
What does a man do, Walter? A man provides for his family.
He is just as obsessed with product quality, uses legal fronts, strives for complete control over the supply chain, and ruthlessly destroys competitors as if conducting a hostile takeover. In the end, he becomes a direct business partner of Madrigal through Lydia. Imagine the irony. He becomes a cog in the very machine that, I believe, created him. This disease spreads further, infecting everyone he loves. He turns Jesse from a small-time drug addict into a broken slave and an accomplice to murder. He destroys Skylar's moral core, drawing her into laundering blood money. But most importantly, he adopts their way of thinking. The evil of Madrigal is impersonal, it's just business. And Walt begins to think the same way. Poisoning Brock is not a villainous act, but a calculated move. Jane's death is a strategic decision to control his partner. He detaches his actions from morality, just as Madrigal separates its criminal divisions from its legal facade. His final confession to Skylar is the culmination of his entire transformation. When he says,
"I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive,"
he is not confessing to simple greed. He is confessing that he has fully embraced the cancerous logic of power and growth for its own sake, the very logic that defines Madrigal. He ceased to be a man and became the embodiment of a corporate system. This theory transforms the story of Walter White into a perfect, hermetic, and inescapable tragic cycle. It is the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. Follow this horrifying symmetry. The cycle begins with the origin of the tragedy. The story starts with the consequences of Madrigal's presumed actions. Walt receives a terminal diagnosis, and the corporation thus creates him as a dying man. Then follows the partnership. To cure himself of financial ruin and imminent death, he builds an empire that reaches its peak only when he becomes a direct partner of Madrigal through Lydia. He tries to heal himself by completely merging with the disease. Next comes the destruction. His last great act is the annihilation of his enemies, including breaking with the machine. He does this by killing Madrigal's key representative, Lydia, with his main weapon, chemistry, poisoning her with ricin. He strikes his creator with its own methods, and finally his demise. He does not die in a hospital or at home. He dies in a laboratory, surrounded by the cold, impartial equipment that was the symbol of his genius, his rise, and his fall. His death is the final return to the world of chemistry that created and destroyed him. Thus, Walt's story ceases to be just a story about the moral downfall of one man. It becomes a devastating critique of a system in which faceless corporations can maim and kill people with impunity while remaining in the shadows. Walter White is still a monster, but he is a monster spawned by a monstrous system. The tragedy no longer belongs only to him. It is the tragedy of a world where the likes of Madrigal operate with impunity, and the likes of Walter White become merely the visible, spectacular symptoms of their invisible disease. This is no longer a story about a man who broke bad. It is a perfect, cyclical, and deeply pessimistic allegory for our time, where the line between legal business and the criminal underworld has blurred beyond recognition, and where the most dangerous cancerous tumors are those traded on the stock exchange. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please subscribe. It is very motivating to create more and better.